I always believed my husband was a good stepfather. He helped raise my daughter for most of her life. But one night I saw a message on his laptop that changed everything, and that's when I started planning my revenge. My name is Sarah Cook. I'm 44 years old, and until last year my life in Oregon felt steady. I've worked as a teacher for nearly 2 decades. Middle school. The age where kids are loud, awkward, and brutally honest. I've always liked that about them. They don't pretend to be perfect. My daughter Emily Cook is 22. She graduated college last year with a writing degree and moved back home while she figured out her next step. Freelance work, internships, all the usual early 20s uncertainty. When she moved back in, I was actually happy about it. Our house had been quiet for years. Too quiet sometimes. My husband David Young and I had been married for 17 years. He came into Emily's life when she was 5. Her biological father disappeared early. No big story there. Some men just drift out of their children's lives like smoke. David stepped in and filled the space. He helped her with homework when math started getting difficult. He coached her little soccer team when she was 8. He built the crooked wooden bookshelf that still sits in her room. For years, Emily adored him. She used to call him Dad without even thinking about it. Which is probably why writing this still makes me feel sick. Because for most of her childhood, I trusted him completely. When Emily moved back home last summer, everything seemed normal at first. The house felt alive again. Emily worked part-time at a small bookstore downtown while applying for writing jobs. Most mornings she left with a coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. David kept his usual routine. He worked as a banker downtown and left the house around 8 every morning. Dinner together most nights. TV after. The same rhythm we'd had for years. But after a few months, I started noticing something strange. Emily and David barely spoke to each other. And I don't mean awkward small talk. I mean they avoided each other completely. If Emily walked into the kitchen and David was there, she would grab whatever she needed and leave within seconds. If David came home while Emily was watching TV, he'd suddenly decide he had emails to answer in his office. At first, I thought they'd had some kind of disagreement. Maybe a political argument or something stupid like that. So one night while we were doing dishes, I asked David about it. I said, "Did you and Emily get into a fight or something?" He looked confused. "No. Why would you think that? You two barely talk anymore." He shrugged and dried his hands on a towel. "She's just busy with her own life." It sounded reasonable. So I let it go. A few days later, I asked Emily the same question. We were driving home from the grocery store. I kept my voice casual. "Did something happen between you and David?" She stared out the passenger window for a moment before answering. "No, nothing happened. You two seem weird around each other." "You're overthinking it, Mom." Then she changed the subject. That should have been my first real warning. But families go through weird phases. People get stressed. Personalities clash. So I ignored it. Still, the tension kept growing. Dinner conversations became stiff. Emily would answer questions politely, but she rarely looked directly at David anymore. And David, well, he stopped talking to her almost entirely. No arguments. No obvious hostility. Just distance. And somehow that silence felt heavier than a fight would have. Thanksgiving that year was uncomfortable. David's sister Betty Young came over for dinner along with his father, Robert Young. Emily stayed quiet most of the evening. At one point, Betty asked her about her writing projects. Emily answered politely, but I noticed something strange. Every time David spoke, Emily's shoulders tightened. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Later that night, after everyone left, I asked David again, "Are you sure nothing happened between you and Emily?" He looked irritated this time. "Sarah, you're imagining things." Maybe I wanted to believe that. Because the alternative never crossed my mind. Not even once. About 4 months ago, everything changed. It was a Thursday night. David had gone to bed early because he had an early meeting the next morning. I was still awake in the living room grading papers. Around midnight, I realized my laptop battery was almost dead, and I'd left my charger in David's home office. He kept his work desk there. I walked down the hallway and pushed the door open. His laptop was sitting on the desk. The screen was still on. I wasn't planning to look at it. I just needed my charger. But as I stepped closer, a message notification appeared in the corner of the screen. The sender's name made my stomach tighten immediately. Emily. At first I assumed it was something normal. Maybe she needed help with a bill or wanted to borrow the car. Then I saw the preview line of the message. And I felt the air leave my lungs. The message said, "Please stop texting me. This has to end." For a second, I just stood there staring at the screen. My brain tried to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe they were arguing about something. Maybe she meant something completely different. But something about the wording felt wrong. Very wrong. I wish I could say I closed the laptop and respected their privacy. I didn't. My hand moved before my brain could catch up. I opened the message thread. And within seconds, my entire life started falling apart. The messages went back months. At first, they seemed almost harmless. David complimenting Emily, saying things like, "You've grown into an incredible woman," or, "You're not a kid anymore." Then the tone shifted. One message from David said, "I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like there's always been something between us." My hands started shaking. I scrolled further. Emily's responses were short. Uncomfortable. "This is weird. You're married to my mom. Please stop." Another message from David appeared. "I can't help how I feel." Then another. "You must feel it too." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I kept reading. Message after message. Emily pushing him away. David insisting there was a connection. And then I noticed something that made everything worse. The timestamps. These messages started last year, right around the time I had traveled for a work conference. 2 weeks out of state. Emily had just moved back home then. While I was away, David had apparently decided to confess feelings to my daughter. My daughter. I sat there in the dark office staring at the screen, unable to move. Eventually, the conversation ended with one final message from Emily. "Please stop texting me. This has to end." That was the message I saw. After that, the conversation stopped. No more messages. No replies. Just silence. And suddenly the tension in the house made perfect sense. They weren't avoiding each other because of a small disagreement. They were avoiding each other because my husband had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I sat there staring at the screen for what felt like hours. My first instinct was rage. The kind of rage that makes your hands shake. My second instinct was fear. Because if this exploded publicly, Emily would get dragged into it. People love blaming young women for things like this, even when they clearly did nothing wrong. So I closed the laptop. I walked back into the living room, and I sat there until the sun came up. By the time morning arrived, one thing was already clear in my mind. My marriage was over. David just didn't know it yet, and I had no intention of warning him. I didn't confront David the next morning, or the next day, or even the next week. For about 7 days, I carried that secret around like a stone in my chest. Every normal moment felt fake. Breakfast conversations. Passing each other in the hallway. Watching TV together in the evening like nothing had happened. David acted exactly the same as always. Calm. Quiet. Routine. Meanwhile, I kept replaying those messages in my head. "You're not a kid anymore. I feel like there's always been something between us." Every time I remembered them, something twisted inside my stomach. But the person I kept thinking about wasn't David. It was Emily. Because the more I thought about it, the more one thing became painfully clear. My daughter had been carrying this situation alone. She'd been dealing with it for months. And she never told me. At first that hurt. But after a while I started understanding why. She was protecting me. She probably thought if I found out, my marriage would explode. And she wasn't wrong. So instead of confronting David immediately, I decided to talk to Emily first. I waited a few days until the moment felt natural. One Saturday morning, I asked her if she wanted to grab coffee with me. There's a small cafe near the river in Portland called Riverside Coffee Cafe. Emily and I used to go there when she was in high school. She looked a little surprised when I suggested it. But she said yes. The drive there was quiet. Emily stared out the window most of the time. I could feel the tension sitting between us like a third person in the car. Part of me wondered if she already knew what I was going to ask. When we got to the cafe, we ordered drinks and found a small table near the window. Rain was tapping lightly against the glass. For a few minutes, we talked about normal things. Her writing. The bookstore. A weird customer she'd dealt with earlier that week. Then I decided to stop delaying it. I looked at her and asked one simple question. "Did David ever make you uncomfortable?" Emily froze. It was immediate. Her eyes dropped to the table. Her hands tightened around her coffee cup. For about 10 seconds, she didn't say anything. Then her eyes started filling with tears. And my heart broke right there. She whispered, "You know." Not even a question. Just a statement. I nodded. I saw the messages. She covered her face with both hands and started crying. The kind of crying where you're trying to stay quiet in public, but you can't stop the tears. I moved my chair closer and put my arm around her shoulders. For a few minutes, we didn't talk. Eventually, she wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said quietly. "I know. I thought it would ruin everything." "It did," I said gently. "Just not in the way you expected." She stared down at the table again. Then she started explaining what had happened. It started the night I left for that work trip. Apparently David had been drinking that evening. Emily was in the kitchen getting a snack when he walked in and started talking to her. At first it was normal conversation. Then the tone shifted. Emily described it like this. He started saying weird things about how grown up I looked. Like he'd just noticed I wasn't a kid anymore. I felt my jaw tighten as she spoke. He said sometimes feelings get complicated, she continued. Then he asked if I'd ever thought about us differently. The word "us" hung in the air between us. "What did you say?" I asked quietly. I told him it was inappropriate and went to my room. After that, Emily said David started sending messages. At first, they were subtle. Compliments. Comments about how mature she was. Then they became more direct. I kept shutting him down, Emily said. I told him it was wrong. I told him he was married to you. She looked up at me then, her eyes red. I never encouraged it. Not even once. I know, I said immediately. Because I had read the messages. Her responses were clear. Firm. Uncomfortable. She wasn't flirting. She was trying to make him stop. Emily continued explaining. After a few weeks of rejection, David started apologizing. He said he had misread things. He promised he'd never bring it up again. Then the messages stopped. That's why we avoid each other now, Emily said quietly. I don't know how to act around him anymore. I nodded slowly. Everything fit together now. The tension. The silence. The way she tensed whenever he spoke. One question had been sitting in my mind since I read those messages. I forced myself to ask it. Did anything physical ever happen? Emily looked shocked. No. Never. She shook her head firmly. I would have told you. And I believed her. The messages made it obvious she had been uncomfortable the entire time. Still, hearing it out loud helped something inside my chest loosen slightly. For a moment we both sat quietly. Rain kept tapping against the window. Then Emily said something that nearly broke me. I'm sorry, Mom. I frowned. For what? For not telling you sooner. She looked miserable. I thought if you knew, you'd lose your marriage. I reached across the table and took her hand. Honey, I said gently, I lost my marriage the moment he sent the first message. Her eyes filled with tears again. We sat there for a long time after that. Talking. Processing. By the time we left the cafe, one thing was certain. Emily had done nothing wrong. She had set boundaries. She had rejected him. And she had been trying to protect me. Which meant there was only one person responsible for this situation. David. But I still didn't confront him. Not yet. Because anger fades. But planning requires patience. Over the next few weeks, I started quietly preparing for the end of my marriage. The first step was meeting with a lawyer. A family law attorney in Salem named Jeff Taylor. His office was in a small building near the courthouse. Calm. Professional. No drama. I explained the situation without showing him the messages. He didn't ask many personal questions. Instead, he focused on practical things. Assets. Accounts. Property ownership. The house turned out to be very important. I had bought it years before I met David, which meant legally it belonged to me. Jeff leaned back in his chair after reviewing the documents. If you decide to file for divorce, he said calmly, your position is very strong. Hearing that made something inside me settle. Over the next 2 months, I followed his advice carefully. I separated bank accounts, moved certain savings, made sure important paperwork was organized. At home, David had no idea what was happening. He continued living his normal routine. Work, dinner, television. Occasionally, he tried small talk with Emily, but she kept things brief. The tension in the house remained thick. But neither of them mentioned the messages. And neither did I. Not until everything was ready. By the time I finally decided to confront David, the outcome was already set. He just didn't realize it yet. And soon he was going to find out exactly how much damage one series of messages could cause. By the time I decided to confront David, I had already accepted something important. The marriage was over. Not damaged. Not struggling. Over. But I didn't want a dramatic explosion. I didn't want shouting, broken dishes, or neighbors peeking through their curtains. I wanted something quieter. Something final. For 2 months I followed the plan my lawyer, Jeff Taylor, had helped me build. I separated finances slowly so nothing looked suspicious. I made sure every document related to the house was organized. I moved certain savings accounts into my name. Because the house mattered. Years before I met David, I bought that home in Portland by myself. Back when Emily was still little and life felt uncertain. Jeff had been very clear about that detail. Legally, he told me, the house is yours. That sentence gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. At home, everything continued like normal. Or at least it looked normal from the outside. David still left for work at the bank every morning around 8. Emily still worked at the bookstore downtown. Dinner still happened most nights around the same time. But the silence between David and Emily never disappeared. They spoke only when absolutely necessary. Short sentences. No eye contact. Every now and then I would watch David glance toward her like he wanted to say something. But he never did. And Emily kept her distance. Watching that dynamic play out every day made something inside me colder. Because it showed me exactly what kind of man he was. Not someone who made a terrible mistake and tried to fix it. Someone who crossed a line and then hid behind silence. About 3 months after I found the messages, I decided it was time. It was a Tuesday evening. Emily was working a late shift at the bookstore, so it was just David and me in the house. He was sitting on the couch watching television when I walked into the living room. "Can we talk?" I asked. He muted the TV. "Sure." My heart was beating hard, but my voice stayed calm. I sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said it. "I saw the messages you sent Emily." The color drained from his face instantly. It was like watching someone get hit with cold water. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. Then he tried the most predictable response imaginable. "What messages?" I reached into the folder I had brought with me and pulled out several printed pages. Screenshots. I placed them on the coffee table between us. "You mean these messages?" David stared at the papers. His shoulders slowly slumped. The silence stretched for almost a full minute. Then he ran his hands over his face and started crying. Actual tears. "I messed up," he said. The words sounded rehearsed, like something he had practiced saying in his head. I was going through a rough time back then. I didn't respond. He kept talking. I had been drinking that night. I didn't mean for things to go that far. My hands stayed folded in my lap. The more he spoke, the calmer I felt. Then he said something that made my jaw tighten. "I think Emily misunderstood what I meant." That was the moment I stopped feeling anything for him. Because even now, after everything, he was trying to shift responsibility. "She didn't misunderstand anything," I said quietly. I pointed at the papers on the table. "She told you to stop." Over and over again. David looked down at the screenshots again. He didn't argue. Instead, he asked a question I had already expected. "Are you going to tell people?" I thought about that for a moment. "No." He looked relieved. But the relief didn't last long. "I'm filing for divorce," I continued. "And you'll be moving out." His head snapped up. "Sarah, the house is mine." I kept my voice steady. "I bought it before we met." My lawyer confirmed it. For the first time since the conversation started, David looked scared. "I have nowhere to go." "That's not my problem." The words surprised even me. But they were true. For years, I had been the one holding everything together. And he had risked destroying it because he couldn't respect a basic boundary. After that, the conversation ended quickly. David packed a suitcase that night and left. He stayed with his sister Betty Young for a while. The divorce process itself was almost boring. Paperwork. Court filings. Meetings with lawyers. There were no big fights over property or money. Mostly because the legal facts were simple. The house belonged to me. And David knew he didn't have much ground to stand on. 3 months later, the divorce was finalized. Just like that. 17 years reduced to a stack of signed papers. The strange thing is, life got quieter after that. Not in a lonely way. In a peaceful way. Emily still lives with me. She's saving money while working on a novel she's been writing. Some evenings we cook dinner together and talk about her story ideas. Other nights we sit on the couch watching terrible reality shows and laughing at them. For the first time in years, the house actually feels calm. David has tried reaching out a few times. Mostly messages asking if we could talk. Or apologizing. But the apologies always seem directed at me. Never at Emily. That tells me everything I need to know. I never responded. Because sometimes the most powerful response is silence. And honestly, that silence feels like its own kind of revenge. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the lights are off, I still think about how close we came to something worse. About how my daughter had to carry that burden alone for months. About how easily trust can shatter. Sometimes people expect revenge to be loud, explosive, public. But mine wasn't like that. My revenge was simple. I protected my daughter. I took back my home. And I removed the one person who didn't deserve to be in either of our lives. No screaming. No scandals. Just a door closing quietly. And staying closed. Still, sometimes I wonder, was walking away quietly the right choice? Or should I have exposed everything and let the truth follow him wherever he went? I honestly don't know. So I guess I'll ask the question that's been sitting in my mind for months. Did I handle this the right way, or was I too easy on him?